trying to get situated here. Can you hear me? Can you still barely hear me?
That's actually a little bit.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have all my stuff turned up. I'm just on a cell phone. I don't know if that has to do with it.
Okay.
But if it's working out now, we are live.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. So your name is Travis, and
Yes.
this is Anna Speaks Out. So welcome to anyone who's here. I see two people live. I don't know if that's just us, but
Thank you for having me.
there will be a replay if nothing else. So I just came across Travis on Instagram not too long ago, and he said that he used to work. And do you see those comments? It says Travis is a little too hot on audio. I'm not sure what that means exactly. But yeah, so you used to work in healthcare, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. What exactly? So yeah, just why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I was a physical therapist. 1999 and 2020.
1999 to 2020.
Mm-hmm. And my primary where I work in care, so in hospital.
You were cutting out for me a little bit. Can you repeat the last sentence, maybe?
Yeah, people are saying that art and that
Yeah. I wonder if it's just like not a good enough connection, or like two. Since there's like two videos, it might be a lot for the technology to handle.
I wonder if I go out, it'll make a difference.
Yeah, you could try.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see.
Okay, they're telling me to use headphones. Let me see if I can find them. All right. Thank you for sticking with us, people. How's this? Do I sound better to anybody? How do I sound now? Anybody? Wait. Oh, here we go. It's a cool brick building.
Okay. Does it work?
I can hear you. Oh, hopefully I sound better. They told me I should try headphones.
Now I can't hear you at all.
Oh, okay. somebody said, eager to hear the experience of one of the actual healthcare workers, the ones who understood and appreciated informed consent, first for
Yeah.
themselves and mostly for the patients they care for. Yeah. But can anybody hear me?
Okay. Well,
Okay, well,
but
but
we should get
we
on
should
with
get
it
on
then.
with it then.
Yeah.
Do the
So
best
Do
we
the
can.
best we can.
yeah, just go ahead.
Okay. Well,
Okay, well,
I worked
I
for
worked for
several different.
several different.
Can't hear you, Anna.
You
I worked for several
I
different
worked for several different
hospitals, but the main one
hospitals.
that I
The
worked
main
for
one that I
was in
worked for was in
Southern California,
Southern
Montana,
California,
Kaiser Permanente.
Kaiser Permanente.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And
And
uh, basically, my duties
basically, my
were
duties were
inpatient hospital.
inpatient
I
hospital.
saw all my
I saw
patients.
all my patients.
Um, most of my patients
Most of my
were in
patients were
intensive
in
care.
intensive care.
Okay, so I worked. There
So
were
I
two
worked. There
different
were
types
two different
of
types of
intensive care
intensive
for
care
people
for
like me.
people like me.
One was
One
regular
was
intensive
regular
care
intensive care
and
and
uh,
uh,
cardiovascular.
cardiovascular.
Hmm.
But then again,
But then
also
again,
for
also
the patients,
the
we would
patients, we
also
would
float
also
from
float
different
from different
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 uh,
uh,
units in the
units in
hospital.
the hospital.
So I would
So
also
I would
follow
also
my
follow my
patients when
patients when
through their
through their
recovery.
recovery.
So when they
So when
would start
we
getting
start
to,
getting
you would
to,
just have
you
a
would just have
step
a
down,
step down,
go to
go
another
to another
floor where they're
floor
getting,
where they're getting,
and they didn't
and they
need that
didn't need that
intensive care
intensive care
more.
more.
So,
So,
uh, do you want me to
do you
get
want me
right
to get
to
right
the specifics of
specific of
uh,
uh,
for
for
C19?
C19?
Sure, probably might as well. I think you already, yeah, you said like where you were, basically what you were doing. So yeah, yeah, like I know you said you saw some things that you didn't agree with and felt like you couldn't kind of go along with it. I think that's why you
Well,
decided not to work with that.
let's say
Let's say
somewhere around
somewhere around like
mid
mid
January.
January.
Around mid January, things started changing an awful lot. Mid January and then like into February. But before I get into that, let me also explain what happened uh, to both myself and a good friend of mine because um, he was basically my assistant and we would always go together. He would go with other therapists, but he would always be with me. And the best part is both of us are also veterans. He was in the army, I was in the Marines and Army, so we got along right off. So um, the interesting part is that he went on a fishing hunting trip up to Wyoming, and when he came back, he felt really sick, and I remember we were in the hub, which is like the nurses' lounge, and he was a pretty good smoker. He always went on smoke breaks and whatever. But long story short, he went in there and he just didn't look good that day. And I remember he like lunged forward, went back, and he actually smashed his whole body into the big uh, industrial sized Xerox machines, and he actually broke it with his back. But he was okay. I mean, his back was okay, but we all thought it was heart related just by how uh, what he was presenting with. And I actually got him, picked him up, put him in a wheelchair, rolled him down to the ER, and he stayed in the hospital for about a good, I want to say about a good 8, 9 days, and they found nothing. They thought it was, a triple B, the bundle branch. They were giving him an angiogram, found nothing. Uh, they did everything. They even, once they released him from the hospital, they gave him like a week or two off. He came back. He was on a cardiac event monitor for about that same time. So during this time, in December of 2019, I started having like upper respiratory issues going on, and it felt like all right here in the upper area where your clavicle is, and it just felt like a heavy burning in my chest. And so I went and got checked out, and they didn't want me around because they didn't know exactly what it was, but they knew what it wasn't. So basically, what it ended up happening is they took me off of work for a few days. They said just rest, fluids, typical stuff like that, and that was it. And I was cleared. I went back to work, and here it is. The new year comes. We're in 2020 now, and right around that time, uh, as soon as they called, which was like I can't remember exact dates, but I know it was the time frame was like mid January and then into February, where they were the hospitals were going into uh, their sequence of events and modes for crisis. And I remember thinking to myself exactly what is going on. And by the way, by this time, uh, my friend uh, had to return to work for full duty, even though he was on an event monitor. Um, Let me recall the sequence of events because it actually is very important. And I remember when they called for our directors. Now we're separate from the clinic. It's even though it's on the same campus in this particular Kaiser hospital. Um, they they were across the street on the campus, and we're in the big hospital on the fourth floor. And I remember going into work, and they were calling for the whole C-19 bit, and we heard about it, you know, a few days prior, but we really weren't taking it all that seriously, uh, with the exceptions to uh, like the emergency room. We heard that the emergency room was getting, for the most part, overflowed. But then again, it is one of the bigger cities in Southern California, and that that ER was always overflowed, especially because we can't, ER, they can't you can't turn people away. So there was a ton of homeless people, and usually if they wanted to get out of the crummy weather, which is usually happens in January, February, if you want to get out of the crummy weather, well, just go into the emergency room.
Can I
So
ask a quick can I ask a quick question? Um, just since you brought up the fact of you can't refuse anybody at the emergency room and the homeless people would hang out there, I spoken to at least one homeless person in the past who said that he was refused at hospitals. So I'm just curious, like, is that actually they're not legally supposed to refuse anyone? Or like, I wonder if the person I talked to was off, or
can you say
Can
that
you
all
say
again?
that all again?
It's hard to
It's
hear.
hard to hear.
you might need to mute your microphone while. I think we have to mute our microphones while the other person is talking. If you can, can someone in the chat tell him he might need to mute his microphone if you can hear me? Okay. So I thought it was interesting. You said nobody is supposed to be refused by the ER ever. So homeless people will just kind of hang out there. Just because I have in the past spoken to a homeless guy who said that he was refused at a hospital when he had like a serious, like, he had like a big cut or big gash or whatever. And he said that they turned him away and he thought it was because he was homeless. I'm just curious if that's like actually technically not supposed to happen legally or something.
Actually, yeah, that that does happen quite a bit. But the patients where they actually find or a kind-hearted nurse or doctor or something like that, and they do make it into the hospital. Now, of course, they're homeless and they don't have any insurance. So everybody gets filtered through all the entities within the hospital if it's indicated that they need it. And a lot of the homeless people that we ended up treating for physical therapy, I ran across it. I I can't count how many times, and not just this hospital, but other hospitals too that I worked for, where people don't care. You know, like uh, it came more from like the upper staff. And when I say upper staff, more along like your administrators, more along like your director of nursing, more like your doctors. They just they seem not to give a damn about the patients who really did need this care. And they were like, "Well, just go in there," and they would actually be telling me my job before I would go see the patient, because what they want to do is they want to push this person out. And they're like, well, if this person does this, walks this X amount of feet or whatever, then that'll certify them to either be transferred or be discharged. Well, I would look at him and I'm like, why? Why would you want something like this? I said, you're already making things cookie cutter for me. I said, I don't know what this patient is going to do from day to day to day. And they're like, well, this is your note from yesterday based on what was done yesterday. What I wrote, what was done yesterday from this, particular patient. Well, everything indicates that they're going to be getting out of here. I was like, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be that way. And I was like, let's see what happens. Uh, I can actually tell you, I made I made a lot of enemies because the patient needed the care. They needed to pay, and I just found that's one of the things that I just didn't like about what I was doing. Healthcare wasn't really healthcare. There was nothing healthy about it, whether it be uh, medical, physical, or even mental wise. They just seem not to really give a damn, which is actually going to go into when I talk more about you know uh, C19 a little bit more, because it just some of the things that happened with patients that did not have C19. To me, that was worse than some of the patients that quote unquote had C19. Okay. So I remember, go ahead, go ahead.
Just to like confirm what you said about they don't seem to really care that much about the patients a lot of the time. I've had good and bad experiences at hospitals in Southern California. Like when I gave birth at UCSD, that was really good for the most part. There
Mm-hmm.
were a couple nurses who were a little weird, but like I was in psychiatric inpatient in San Diego County a few years ago in 2015, and like I was in a room with somebody who was like multiple personality disorder, waking up all throughout the night telling me like these, what their delusions were. So that didn't help me to get better, and like a lot of the workers in there were like not friendly, and it's a mental health place. So yeah, it's kind of like they're just doing it for money or something. So yeah, continue though with what you were saying about the timeline and stuff.
Okay. First off, let me just apologize. I do have bad hearing, so it's it's just how it is. There's a lot of hearing loss in my left ear, so he needs to mute while she is talking. Okay, I'll remember to do that. Okay.
I can I'll say what I said again if you want to mute. Okay. So yeah, I was just saying, just to confirm about like hospitals seeming like they don't care that much about health care or the patients all the time. I've had some good experiences at hospitals in Southern California. Like I gave birth. I didn't give birth. I was at UCSD for like aftercare for giving birth for a few days, and that was really good. There was just like a couple nurses who seemed like they just wanted to get out of there, but most people were really nice. But like in 2015, I was in psychiatric inpatient for a few days in Southern California, elsewhere, and like I was in a room. My roommate was had like multiple personality disorder and was waking me up throughout the night, telling me her delusions and stuff. And so that wasn't conducive to me getting better. And like a lot of the workers, and not a lot, but like at least a couple of the workers, especially like the psychiatrists, were like just getting annoyed with me and like not being very friendly. So it is odd, just to like kind of confirm what you were saying. But please continue with what you were talking about before with like the timeline that you said was important.
Okay, now on a personal note, I had already planned, and there was my senior therapist there. We had already planned. I was planning on resigning and coming back home, and home is in East Tennessee uh, by December, November, December timeframe. Um, my, my senior therapist, he was planning right around that time because I remember we were talking about that, and again, we had no idea what was coming up, what was going to go on. So I remember we all went home, and the very next day when we drove in, we were all cordoned off. We still parked in the same, pretty much in the same area, but when we walked into the building, that was the last time that we were allowed to access the door that went through the ER, which kind of made it easy for us to go through the ER and into uh, where the elevators were, and then straight up to our department. But that was the last time that was ever going to happen. We can no longer enter or exit through that area. It was all cordoned off by pretty much before, like, right before lunchtime, and I remember uh, they had guards, well, secure, inner security and stuff like that. They had guards. You need to go this way, you need to go that way. Don't do this, don't do that. It pretty much all started like very, very quickly. And I remember they were talking. All of a sudden, the hospital. It was weird. All of a sudden, we were completely out of masks. There were no masks to be found, and everybody, we had to have them. And of course, when you work in an inpatient, I was so used to going into negative uh, pressure rooms. So because I do wear a beard, uh, I had to have the whole helmet and the reverse oxygen and stuff like that. So I was used to that. But a lot of times we would have like the oversized N95s that would fit over. It almost looked like what the construction workers use and stuff like that. So we I remember every floor. Now on our floor was the overflow for the downstairs um, ICU. Okay, so there was second floor, fourth floor across the hall from me was the overflow from ICU, and then there was also the PICU and the NICU on that side for the kids and whatnot. And they had to move, and they pretty much they started taking over that whole floor because they didn't want to infect anybody up there. They had no idea at that time. They didn't know. Uh, they had rotoprone beds. Do you know what those are? You ever see those? Okay, rotoprones. Uh, it kind of looks like I wish I had a picture or something like that. I didn't think of that, but rotoprone bread, they usually use it for people that are very, very compromised and they can't move. And it's really to keep uh, your body from one, not getting any pressure sores or breakdown or anything like that. Keep your lungs with the fluids, keep it even. And they did use it for certain viruses that were contracted over in Africa, like I forget which ones, like Vika virus and stuff like that. I do know they do that, and they actually do. They go 360, okay, or you can, and you put it on like a therapy mode, and it would just like tilt back and forth. Um, the I noticed somebody did say that did they do tests, and from what I understand, they did do tests, but we didn't do it. We didn't do it in the hospital. It was the the emergency. The emergency people did all that work, and that way, if they needed to come into the hospital, we already knew that they had C19. It didn't come from us. We did not test every single day for whatever reason. We didn't do that. But they had uh, not just the intensive care units where they were all cordoned off and they were strictly meant for C19 patients, but they also had two other that were completely cordoned off, and those were for the patients that do have or did have C19, but they they kept them a little bit more isolated than say the other patients that were down on the other side of the hall. Um, Now there were a line, kind of reminded me of like how you see 18 wheelers just all lined up on the highway. Well, that's what they had. All these rotoprone beds, and I remember going, "What in the world are they doing?" Now the only time you would see that was if they were cleaning or if they were training or if there was something new. And I remember looking at my coworkers going, "What exactly is this? What's happening?" We're going, "Man, this is so weird, so bizarre." We also heard uh, that they were intubating people and they were also doing the poke here. I don't think I'm allowed to say that, but you know what I mean. Uh, I know it begins with a T. Sorry if I mention it, but uh, they would do that, and the first thing that comes to your mind as a healthcare professional, regardless if you're a therapist or a doctor or a nurse, you're already weakening that patient by doing that. So regardless of what they have, you're already compromised. They're already compromised, but now you're compromising them even more so. So I was thinking, well, whatever this is, obviously they're treating it as respiratory, upper respiratory, whatever. And to answer the question of the one person, I remember saying that yeah, they do or they did. Uh, what do you call it? Test. And when they test, they filter through. They come through us. Now, if they ran tests every day, that was not our responsibility. That was usually the responsibility of their nurse that was in charge of them. Every single patient that I had seen that had C19, they were already uh, compromised in some capacity, uh, whether it be lung problem, liver problem, kidney. They were already grossly overweight. They had some kind of cardiac issue, whatever it may be. They were already compromised, or they were already immunocompromised. I seen that quite a bit. Um, Supposedly, I don't know how true this is, but our hospital had Southern California's very first uh, C19 patient. Unfortunately, he didn't. He was one of the ones that did not make it. And again, this was a person. He traveled over. He traveled abroad. He came back from wherever he came from. Got off the plane. Didn't feel right, and went to the hospital. They ran a test, and then, and he was another one. Now this man was not old. Okay, I'm 52. At that time, I think that man was somewhere in his mid 50s. And other than that, I mean, the man looked healthy. He did everything that I asked him to do or made him do as a therapist when we would go into his room. And that's where we were only allowed to do the therapy within the room. So the rooms, again, regardless of where they were located, they really weren't all that big, and we were only able to do what we can within the rooms. Okay, so if we just walked back and forth, we would walk back and forth like 100 times to cover so many feet. So um, let me gather my thoughts. But he he was, unfortunately, he was one of the ones that we I know I had personally treated that had died. And again, that's also when we started hearing all, and they weren't rumors, where the hospitals, if they were they had C19, regardless if they went home, they would get a huge sum of money for those patients. Even if they passed away, they would still get a huge amount of money for those patients. So I remember right around this time, one of my friends, uh, he he stopped going to work. He just completely stopped going to work. Uh, the fear in a lot of the people was just, to me, uh yeah, exactly what that person meant. Passing away meant more money. Yeah, that's actually very true. Very very true. Huge money. And um right around this time, we were told, it was about a week afterwards, our supervisors, our directors, as we call them, they came up, which was rare. They came up and they said, no matter what, you will treat these patients. You don't have much of a choice. You will be here for your shift. You're going to do your job. Make sure that you're at your duty stations and blah 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 and whatever. I remember going, what? Okay, well, why? That doesn't make any sense. You're telling me this is what I wanted to do in life. Why are you making this, like, got to do this? Because if we didn't, they were going to report us to the the licensing board, and we were going to have our licenses revoked and reported on and all this weird crap. So right around that time, I remember looking at my friend, and I go, this is a little bit weird. This is all wrong. And also, let me say, on a side note, politically speaking, I remember saying to myself, this is a little too convenient. You know, they made this C19 thing happen, and then all of a sudden, here you go. You know, and it was right during, ironically, an election year. Okay, uh, to me, it seemed a little bit too convenient for that. You wanted to say something, or you want me to keep going?
Can I say something? Can you hear me? Keeps freezing on my end. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. So I think I remember at some point there were nurses and people like healthcare workers who, even if they were sick, they had symptoms, they were expected to be at work, but like the only Like if there were ones who were totally healthy but didn't have the jab, they were not allowed to be there. But if they had the jab and they had symptoms, they were supposed to be there. So it seemed backwards. Was that basically your experience?
So um, you also to finish what I was saying before about those rotoprone breads. I remember now they all made them into their proper rooms. So they actually switched out a lot of the proper hospital beds that they move up and down and stuff like that. We've all seen them, and they're all made by the same people. Arjos, we're just used to calling them that. They're Arjos, and they they're now all in their proper rooms. Now we also have something that you probably had seen, especially in Southern California, where there's a lot of nurses that they're traveling nurses. So and a lot of traveling nurses, rotochrome beds for the actually prone prone. Rotoprone beds traditionally are for patients that have uh, spinal issues, whether they're diagnosed as quadriplegic or tetraplegic, and what they do is they can rotate full 360, or you can put them on a duty cycle, and it keeps the blood flowing. Basically, that's all it is, and it's just done on a duty or therapy cycle, and it can move up and down, side to side, or complete 360. Yeah, yeah, prone positioning, right? Okay, so they would use them for these patients because they were already like predetermining that these individuals were going to be completely incapacitated, and especially they're already incapacitating them more by doing that. You're welcome. And so right around this time, this is a personal note. I remember looking at my coworker who was a senior therapist, and I said to him, I think I'm putting in my paperwork for to get out of here early. And he says, you know what? I'm doing the exact same. Right around that time, they started closing. Uh, not I'm just not going to talk about what happened to us, an inpatient. Let me talk briefly about what happened to all the therapists that were outpatient. So if you were in the clinic, they closed the clinics. All the clinics were closed. They were like a ghost town. Nobody was there. And they closed them down within a day. And they were going to start taking those therapists and filter them for help uh, up in our units. Now they have no idea what we do. No idea. To me, it was always easy to just slip in and just do clinical physical therapy. Um, it was very, very simple. It was just you go in there. To me, I always looked at it like a sports therapist. You're kind of like an overpaid gym teacher in a way, and you just go in, oh, do this, do that. Yeah, there's manual therapy and whatnot, and that has a whole sense of its own. But my whole career, practically, with the exception for 4 years of it, was all in the hospital, always in the hospital. Or I did do a little bit of home health therapy in very little skilled nursing facilities, but most of it was hospital. And I did at one time. I actually did do a lot of wound care for a while, but um, get back to my story. Uh, I put in my paperwork to get out early. So did my friend, and there were five physical therapists that year that were going to retire that year or the next. They were gone. They put it in. They said, "See ya." They saw the writing on the wall, and they're like, "We're out of here." And I mean, they were some of the old hat therapists. They've been there for almost beyond their 20, but they were doing 25, 30 years, but they were done. They were done with all this. And one therapist just decided not to come to work anymore. Just and he had put in, and for some reason they just kept giving it to him and allowing it to happen because I guess either one or both of his kids were immunocompromised, whatever. But he just took off and he used all his leave time, which was weird, but they allowed him to do it. But we went to work every day, and some of the odd things that I had seen that happen that were really just to me bizarre because we would always have one or two C19 patients throughout the course of your workday, and the rest of them were just like your regular everyday patients, and we would end up C19 seeing me all over the hospital, which was not rare, but it was very very rare, especially if you're one of the therapists that always worked in uh, intensive care. If you were intensive care, it's kind of where you were. You were stuck all day. You even had lunch with the nurses and whatnot. But um, we started having to train all the outpatient therapists. You know, this is where this is. This is what we do. This is the responsibilities. They really had no clue what would happen inside the hospital. So they would just come along with us. And after about a day or so, then they were off on their own. And the man, that just like boosted up the manpower for us to help with, supposedly this quote unquote huge influx of all these infected people that honestly really didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. It really wasn't as bad as they portrayed it on the news and whatever. So then uh, we started properly seeing the C19 patients in their rooms, and they had this whole. Uh, they would always call it a duty schedule, and it would be like this placard that was laminated, stuck outside the patient's room, and they had them on every single thing. And you had to have another nurse or nurse assistant or something like that come up to doff and don your gown, your gloves, and all that other stuff. And if you normally when we went into rooms, we went in pairs. So there was myself and there was the my friend or another assistant or something like that. And that's usually how that happened. If you went it alone, that was very very rare, but I did, and especially if the patient was light or easy or whatever, and they weren't like grossly overweight or whatever, we were able to maneuver or manipulate the patient. Um, but a lot of the people that I had seen outside of from the ICU, honestly, they just kind of reminded me, yeah, they had other underlying issues. That's understandable, but outside of that, it just seemed like they had just a really bad cold, to tell you the truth. And they looked and sounded horrible. To me, they reminded me of like the season that we're in right now here where I live. They looked like they had bad congestion because of the outside, and there's all the you know they just needed like something for antihistamine or whatever. They just looked and sounded horrible. um but every morning, and I think it was done on a schedule of every hour the nurse had to take their temperature and their vitals and stuff like that. Normally where it was only done uh before and after shift change. That's usually when it was done. Now the whole cycle had ramped up. So again, that that takes manpower and takes away from a lot of the other stuff. Now, on a side note, on the floors that weren't dedicated to C19. To me, that was worse, way worse, because from what I had encountered, they were not receiving the proper care or attention. Not saying that they weren't, but it was just, to me, it wasn't taken serious enough. Okay. For example, one that definitely sticks out in my mind, which was absolutely horrible, was this 25-year-old female was shot in the neck. We saw a lot of gunshot wounds, knives wounds, stuff like that, but she was shot in the neck, and it it hit her spine, and she's just laying there in bed. So they instantly said that, oh, she's going to be a quadriplegic for the rest of her life. So I went in the room and did normally what I did, and you test certain things, and if it elicits a certain response, then well, let's see what happens if you do this. Let's try this. Let's try that. And I remember going outside, and I know I was excited because I was just like, that patient, you might want to run, let the doctor know that they need to run a little bit more tests. She very well may not be, paraplegic or quadriplegic because, they might have missed something. She's eliciting certain response after I gave her these tests. They were going to let her just, they were just going to let her lie there and never get better. A 25 year, actually, she turned 25 while she was there. And again, this was a domestic thing. So now people are stuck at home, that they're not being stuck at home. If you're not this quote unquote essential worker, well, you're out of work, and now you're stuck with your loved ones, your spouse, your kids. They're probably driving you crazy. And that's exactly what was happening. I saw more alcohol overdoses, more drug overdoses, bad, so bad that people were literally either giving themselves heart attacks or they were having strokes as a result of using and abusing too much cocaine or meth or whatever it may be. I'm telling you, that to me was way worse than than what I saw. And of course, uh, the domestic abuse. There was a lot of that, a lot of that, and you never hear anything about that at all. You know, to me, that was way worse than, not discounting, the C19 patients, because what they had was legit. It was made legit because of all their other underlying, whether they knew they had it or not, was all their other underlying issues that they had. It just brought it out. Just like in all my years, usually if you saw a patient that had really bad flu or influenza, it was bad. And sometimes, unfortunately, sadly enough, they wouldn't make it. You didn't uh, expire as a result of XYZ. No, there was other underlying issues, and that's why they ended up expiring. That's the whole reason why. So again, they didn't expire because of heart related issues, lung, liver. No, they would list it as C19, and that's where they get their cha-ching, their money from, which was horrible, horrible.
Can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you hear me? Just to make sure. Yeah, okay. So just to make sure I'm getting all of this correctly, to summarize what I think I heard you say, I'm saying that basically when this whole C19 thing started off in like the beginning of 2020, they were pretty much ready to go. They had the special beds all lined up. They shut everything down within like 24 hours. Um, did like a thing here intubating that actually made them a little bit more immunocompromised. Okay. Um, and when they expired from C19, they got the most money, and everybody else who didn't have C19 was kind of not getting everything that they should have been getting, and it was even bad for people at home because of, yeah, like added stress. Sounds like a whole recipe for disaster.
So let me see. I remember this was right around the time I remember uh, they were telling me that it was probably going to be. Now this is on the personal note. They were telling me whether it was going to be end of May, beginning of June. That I was going to be resigning, and I was like, okay, fine, cool. So it was probably around now. So March, April. So April time frame. I remember walking early in the morning because most most PTs or most PT or physical therapy services, we don't get to do 12-hour shifts. So some very few do 10-hour shifts or 8-hour shifts. But what we do is we what we refer to as dovetailing, so that we can cover uh, the whole 12-hour shift of the nurses. So some come in early, some come in late, some will leave early throughout the day, and some will leave late. So I was one of the people that did come in not as early, but like the mid, not like around 8 o'clock. And I remember coming in. I already had my patient census with me, what I needed to do, where I needed to go. So I would just grab it and just go straight to the unit that I knew I was going to. I knew where I was going. A lot of times I just didn't even report to my I just went straight to my duty station. So um, this is this is this is when they started doing that whole. I'm sure you've seen them. The I find it horrible or reprehensible, uh, where the TikTok nurses were doing all their dance and stuff like that. Okay. Then there were some very, very unfamiliar faces that I've never seen in my life before. Different, different nurses. Now, I seen these nurses every day for years. Not, I wouldn't say a decade, but at least half a decade. I seen them every single day. Now all of a sudden I see all these other people. Where in the world are they coming from? And I asked, and they're like, "Well, some are leftovers from night shift, and some are from the traveling nurse services." Like that many? Why do we need so many? And they're like, "All the patients that are here." I didn't say anything. I just again I kept quiet. I learned how to do that when I was in the military. Just keep your mouth shut, because I always had this knack of being in trouble and being in the boss's office, because I was very, very outspoken, and they were happy to see me. They were happy to see me go. I was happy to see them go too, but um, I was just like, what in the hell is going on? And one of the nurses who I didn't know, they were like, "Hey, do you want to go outside and be in this video?" I was like, "For what?" They're like, "Oh, we're gonna do some dancing. It's for what do they call it? Like for to get everybody together." And I'm like, "Man, I don't even do that. I don't even dance in clubs. Okay, I just don't. Okay, that's not gonna happen." I'm like, "Just leave me alone." And usually, if you went into the nurses' lounge, 90% of the time there was food, and that's what I was interested in. I didn't care. I don't want to go dance or anything like that. I want your free food. So that's why I would go into that room. Um, but anyway, I know I know some of the people. Whenever you see the TikTok nurses dancing, there's some familiar faces to me, and I just I could not believe that that was way more important than some of the other stuff. And I remember I said something to my friend who was with me at the time, and I said, "Do you remember when we were in the service? Uh, if you had time to, screw around and do dumb shit, then really there's nothing to do." And I was like, "What are they doing? What are these people doing?" I said, "First off, it's a mockery of us. What are they doing? They're making us look like fools. And if they're making video, where in the hell is this video going?" So at that time, I really was unfamiliar with TikTok. I really didn't care. So I only had I only had TikTok for maybe a year on my phone, and it was only because of the job that I do now, and I took it off. I found no use for it, and it bogged down my phone. I hated it. It was pointless to me. I was like, I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. That's good enough. I really don't care about that other stuff. But no, they were very serious. They were doing this stuff. So most of the time, they were doing it at night because night shift nurses, I guess they find free time to do that, and they did. But they were also doing it during day shift as well, and it was for all that rah rah rah, make believe, false motivation garbage is what it was. And to me, they just made a whole something that at one time in my life I was very very proud to be in. In the medical professions, I was just like, what is this crap? This is just so, it was just so stupid. Outside of all the other weird things that were happening, again, I'm not, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, and that's not my expertise of when you're intubating people or traking people or whatever it may be. It just didn't make any sense to be doing something like that for somebody that has a colorful name for the common cold. I was like, why? What are you doing? And especially for the people, see, this is what bothered me. They already knew, but especially for the people that already had this an a sundry list of all these other issues. Are you not paying attention to those? And apparently, no, they weren't. They were just so hyper focused on this C19 crap is what it was. It was just all garbage. So right around that time was all we're also leading into May. And if you remember May, they started with all the what do you call it? The BLM and the Antifa people and whatever. And again, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you had seen, but I lived in Southern California in Redlands, and there was a lot of weird things that were going on. Uh, Amazon Amazon has one of their locations that was across the 10 freeway from where I lived, and they they blew up two warehouses from Amazon. Now I had already resigned at this point, so I was just like packing up, getting ready to go, and whatever. But I remember when that happened, it was bad, and they were boarding up like in downtown Redlands. They were boarding up all the stores. We were no longer uh, like my profession now is I'm a musician, full time musician, and back then either I would teach or I would do it on the side, or I would still go take lessons. And I remember walking into the music shop, and it was all boarded up, and they were boarding up one of the pizza places that's downtown and everything. Like, what is this for? Why are you doing this? And they're like, oh, they're going to come here. BLM's going to come here and riot. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, I can't even go into Walmart, you know, with without a hazmat suit, but yet they're they're going to be doing all this other weird crap. I'm like, come on, man, what the hell is going on? This is so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that time. I was in like San Diego area, and I actually went downtown with a friend, and just to like see what all the aftermath was. And there was, yeah, definitely boarded up windows. There was the graffiti related to BLM everywhere. And yeah, I was thinking it's weird. Like we have to wear masks at work in the deli that I worked at, but these people can like be in giant groups and because it's their First Amendment right. But you know, only they seem to get that right. Anyway, yeah, that was pretty weird. There was something else I was gonna say. I forget. But we are at an hour now. I was trying to keep it at about an hour. So if you have any closing statements to wrap it up.
So, just to kind of like wrap it up the best I can. Um, I had resigned uh, at the very end of May, and I wasn't sad. I was more sad. Well, I was because I really loved and I enjoyed patient care, but by this time I was completely done from what I had witnessed, not just throughout the years, but especially like the last few months. That did it. That really did it for me. Just from the complete to me unintelligent approach of how they administered care, and to me it wasn't even care. It wasn't. It had, to me, healthcare has nothing to do with health at all, at all. It was just, unfortunately, something that I love, that I even completely retired. I retired my license uh, once I found out that I had to have the jibbity jab in order to have certain things and go to certain places. Even here in my home state, I was like, no, I'm done. I mean, getting yelled at by people if you don't have your mask on, your little nappy or whatever. I was like, I'm done, dude. I'm totally done. So I was like, I'm getting, not that I'm totally old, but I'm getting too old for all that. Not, it's nonsense. It's pointless.
So you keep kind of cutting out for me, but yeah, basically got that you said it. Once you were required, once you were required to get the jab in order to do anything, and you could just see that it was all seemed like nonsense. You were just kind of over it, which I totally relate to. Thankfully, we haven't been required, required
Mhm.
to wear masks here in California, where I live, for a while, like the last year or something now. But some people have started wearing them by choice. Like I went to a restaurant and like the all the employees were wearing them. It's like, oh, are you required to do this again? And they're like, oh no, I just want to because it's something's going around again. So
Yeah.
there are people, people are very well brainwashed, sadly. So they accomplished that. But yeah, thank you for being here, sharing your story. It was pretty interesting.
Okay.
Okay. Probably
I
get to
appreciate
I
you for
appreciate you
having.
for having. Yeah. And I'll see you around on Instagram and wherever, Facebook. And thank you to the
Okay.
guests or our watchers for being here. Spread it around if you found it interesting. And yeah, have a great day.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope what I said.
I was had myself muted so you could whatever you were gonna say just now. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you for having me, and I sincerely hope my information helps somebody. I appreciate everybody that was on. Okay. Thank you. And for appreciate everybody else that will listen later on.
And okay, here's how I exit. All right. See everybody next time.